Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle one of history's most powerful and, let's be honest, most controversial figures, Genghis Khan.
When you hear his name, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's this image of a brutal conqueror, a man responsible for the deaths of millions. But if you go to Mongolia, he's seen completely differently. He's revered, celebrated as the founding father of their nation, the guy who unified the tribes and built the largest land empire the world has ever seen.
So how does one person end up being both a celebrated national hero and a reviled tyrant? It's a huge contradiction. And to even begin to understand it, we've got to go way back to the beginning, to the story of a young boy named Temüjin.
And his story? Well, it doesn't start with glory or power. It starts with some of the most brutal hardship you can imagine, out on the vast, unforgiving Mongolian steppe.
So picture this. He was born around 1162, and when he's just a kid, his whole world gets turned upside down. His dad, a minor chieftain, gets poisoned by rivals. And his own tribe? They just abandon him, his mom and his siblings. They literally leave them to starve. This young boy had to survive in near poverty, was captured and even enslaved multiple times. Just a brutal start to life.
And when I say this period of survival was ruthless, I mean it. Tensions were high, especially with his older half-brother, Bektar, over things like food and who was in charge. So what does Temüjin do? In a totally cold, calculated move, he and his other brother ambush and kill him. This was a huge taboo, so much so that it was scrubbed from the official records, but we know about it from this incredible source called The Secret History of the Mongols. So you can see how these brutal early years basically forged the man he was going to become, right? It hammered these core values into him. Be intensely, unshakably loyal to your friends and followers, but be utterly, completely ruthless to your enemies. And on top of all that, he had this magnetic personality that just drew people to him, even when things looked hopeless.
Okay, so that iron will, forged in pure survival mode, that became the foundation for everything that came next. Let's dive into how this outcast, Temüjin, started to become a unifier.
It took years of making smart alliances and just relentless warfare. He defeated every single rival tribe out there on the steppe. He even defeated his one-time blood brother, a guy named Jamuka. By the early 1200s, there was no one left to challenge him. He was the undisputed master of Mongolia, and it was time to make it official at a massive assembly called a Kurultai.
So in 1206, that great assembly happens. And at this meeting, they give Temüjin a new name, a title, Genghis Khan, which probably meant something like universal ruler. But this wasn't just a fancy new title. Oh no, this was the start of a complete social revolution that was going to turn Mongol society completely on its head.
I mean, he just completely tore down the old system. Forget old tribal loyalties. Those are gone. He'd conquer a tribe, and instead of leaving them together, he'd break them up and scatter their warriors into his own units so they couldn't rebel. And who got promoted? Not the guy with the fancy last name. It was the guy with skill and loyalty. It was a true meritocracy. He even created his own elite imperial bodyguard, the Kishig, to keep everyone in line.
Now this is what's so fascinating. This decimal system he set up, units of 10, 100, 1,000 warriors, it wasn't just for the army. He reorganized the entire society this way. Each unit included the soldiers' families and households. What he did was effectively turn the entire Mongol nation into one massive, perfectly integrated war machine.
So now he has this unified, incredibly disciplined nation behind him, a nation literally forged for war. So what's next? He turns his ambition outwards, and the world was about to change, forever.
And his armies, wow, they moved with terrifying speed and brutal efficiency. First, they invade the Western Xia. Then, they start their campaign against the powerful Jin dynasty in northern China. By 1218, he controls the eastern end of the Silk Road, and his new empire is right up against the border of the massive Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia.
The invasion of that empire, Khwarezmia, was kicked off by a massive mistake. The Shah, their ruler, executed Mongol ambassadors who were just sent to set up trade. For Genghis Khan, killing an envoy wasn't just an insult, it was an unforgivable act that demanded total, absolute vengeance. And so he unleashed the full might of his army.
The result was
Well, a level of destruction that's pretty hard to even wrap your head around.
Yeah, so that number, that's the estimated death toll from the sieges of just 3 cities, Nishapur, Merv, and Herat. Persian historians basically recorded that the entire populations were just annihilated. Now, modern scholars are pretty sure that number is an exaggeration. But you know what? It still tells you that the level of destruction was absolutely, undeniably catastrophic.
Genghis Khan died in 1227, still on campaign. But his legacy, whew, it's still one of the biggest, most heated debates in all of history.
And this really gets right back to the contradiction we talked about at the very beginning. On the one hand, his unbelievably brutal conquests led to something called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. This was a period of stability that made the Silk Road safe, leading to this incredible exchange of goods, ideas, technology, everything from gunpowder to printing, all across Eurasia. But, and it's a huge but, it was a peace that was bought at an almost unimaginable human cost.
And it's wild how differently he's remembered today depending on where you are in the world. In Mongolia, he's the founding father, a national hero. In Russia, he's remembered for the destructive Tatar yoke. Go to much of the Arab world, and he's seen as the enemy who destroyed a golden age of civilization. And in China, he's often been seen as a Chinese hero, a unifier. It's all about perspective.
So in the end, the man himself was just as complex as his legacy. To his followers, he was incredibly generous and loyal. To his enemies, he was completely merciless. He wasn't into luxury, he actually listened to advice from all sorts of people, and he was driven by this powerful, unshakable belief that he was destined by heaven itself to rule the world.
So, conqueror, unifier, destroyer, founder. Which one was he? Well, he was all of them. He's a total paradox. And he leaves us with this massive question. How should we judge a figure who both created and destroyed on such a colossal, world-changing scale? Can there ever really be a final verdict on someone like that?